Hey guys, Jake here. A boy is brutally killed by a Mononoke, only to be possessed by a legendary cat demon that grants him all its powers before he's recruited by an anti-Mononoke agency and paired with a Thicc baddie. This is the story of Jiro Azuma, a young man born into a long line of ninjas who has been able to talk to animals since birth. Because of this, he was bullied at school, but his dog, Nachi, tells him that he shouldn't feel bad because it's a very special gift. Years pass and we now find Jiro surrounded by a group of thugs who tell him he's standing on their turf. Jiro isn't intimidated, which infuriates the leader of the group who lunges at him but ends up falling into the river instead. Jiro then turns to face the other two, who start to wonder nervously if he might actually be a ninja. Just like their leader, they end up in the river as well, and the group runs off. Right after that, Jiro hears a voice thanking him, and it turns out to belong to a cat. The cat is relieved that he and his friends will finally be able to live in peace in that area, but he's worried that Jiro may have made enemies by stepping in. Jiro isn't concerned since he's used to that kind of trouble by now. A crow teases him, telling him that with a face like his, he'll never get a girlfriend. After saying goodbye and heading home, Jiro gets scolded by his grandfather, who has already heard about the fight and complains that he didn't teach him shinobi arts just so he could go around brawling. The grandfather throws a few kunai at him and then shows him the Azuma family's heirloom. The great shinobi sword, he explains, was given to their family by the shogun himself during the Edo period, so Jiro should honor his roots and act like a true member of the Azuma clan. Jiro rudely replies that it's probably a fake sword, which enrages his grandfather, who draws the blade to prove its sharpness and starts slicing through everything in sight. Jiro is left to clean up the mess afterward. His grandfather then tells him that there's a neighborhood meeting that night, and he won't be back until late, reminding him to lock the door. Jiro agrees though, he thinks to himself that he's not a kid anymore. Just then, the crow shows up to tell him there's a cat in trouble in the forest. The crow leads the way, and when they arrive, Jiro is startled by the cat's condition. He asks the crow if he knows the cat, but the crow says he's never seen it before, and that no matter how much he called out to it, it never responded. Jiro can see the cat is in bad shape when suddenly a voice, the cat's, demands to know who dares disturb him. Another voice then addresses him as Rago, the black star of misfortune and devourer of the sun, asking him to wake from his slumber and lend them his power. Rago tells them to rot and warns that they'll regret interrupting his rest. He doesn't take orders from anyone. In response, they tell him that this will then be the place where he dies. A while later, Rago opens his eyes and finds himself in Jiro's room. Jiro happens to walk in just then, glad to see him awake. He offers him some food, introduces himself, and asks for his name. The cat doesn't answer, and Jiro asks what's wrong, since even stray cats have names. The cat wonders to himself who this idiot is, assuming there's no point trying to explain anything to him when Jiro tells him not to call him an idiot. The cat is stunned and immediately hides under the bed. Jiro tells him to come out already, while the cat thinks to himself that he can't sense any spiritual energy coming from the boy, meaning he really is human. Since the cat won't budge, Jiro decides to bring out his secret weapon. The cat is confident nothing will get him to come out, but the secret weapon works anyway. Jiro remarks that, as the saying goes, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Jiro finds it funny that a cat would consider himself a man, and the cat corrects him he's not a cat. He introduces himself as Rago, an immortal, a Mononoke, explaining that beings like him usually take human or animal form, with some living alone in the mountains or deep in the forest. Jiro asks if Mononoke are like him, and Rago can tell he's not lying. The boy genuinely has no idea what he's talking about. Rago reveals that he was attacked by other Mononoke, though he doesn't remember much since he was in a deep sleep. The only thing he recalls is being surrounded after being woken up. They had come to ask for his help, but he wasn't interested and told them to get lost. Jiro asks why he turned them away if they were fellow Mononoke, and Rago explains that he despises his own kind. Nothing but arrogant parasites who hide their weakness behind the strength of others. Jiro immediately relates to that feeling, though. Rago tells himself not to get too invested, since Jiro is human and won't believe him anyway. Jiro replies that just because he doesn't understand everything doesn't mean he doesn't believe him. After all, he talks to animals himself, so it makes no difference to him that Rago is a Mononoke. Meanwhile, back in the forest where Rago had been lying wounded, a red-haired woman contacts headquarters to report finding blood that must belong to Rago, meaning he can't be far. Her superior orders her to hold off for now, saying he'll join the search team himself. She leaves and vanishes without a trace, while elsewhere a mysterious shadow is shown, smiling menacingly. Back at the house, Jiro is bathing Rago, and is surprised to see that his wounds have already healed, making him think there might be some truth to what Rago told him. Rago says he already knew Jiro wouldn't believe him, but Jiro replies that he believed about half of it. The other half sounded more like the ramblings of a dying cat. The situation reminds him of his beloved Nachi, his old dog, a big, beautiful, affectionate animal, the complete opposite of Rago. Rago asks if he has a death wish for saying that, while Jiro continues, explaining that back then he was badly bullied at school, and whenever Nachi saw him, she'd ask him to give her a bath so that all the bad things would wash away with the dirt. She would then tell him how glad she was to have him, but that whenever he could, she hoped he'd also help others, since that was a gift only he had. His words strike a chord with Rago, but just as he's about to say something, Jiro cuts him off to rinse him. A little later, Jiro is fast asleep, while Rago quietly apologizes, knowing he owes him one, but explains that he has to leave. Even though his wounds have healed, he still lacks strength, so he needs to go soon. Just then, Jiro appears and points out that he's still limping. Rago panics and asks what exactly Jiro did and how he got there so fast when he had been sound asleep moments earlier. Jiro explains that it was his kawarimi technique, adding that he has no intention of letting Rago leave in that condition. Rago tells him it's none of his business, but Jiro insists it became his business the moment he saved him. Rago snaps back that he never asked for help. He helped him because he wanted to, so Jiro should stop playing hero, since it wouldn't have mattered to him if he'd died there. Jiro asks why he'd say something like that, and Rago irritably tells him it's not his concern. That comment sets Jiro off, and he tells Rago to stop talking about dying so casually. In response, Rago flexes his power and warns him to shut up, reminding him that he hasn't forgotten what Rago is, a Mononoke, a spirit that devours humans. The two of them come from completely different worlds, so it would be best for Jiro to just leave him alone. Just then, a mysterious figure joins the confrontation, and Rago's expression drops. He knows they've come for him. Jiro tells the stranger he wasn't invited into his home and that he's picked a bad time to show up since he's already in a foul mood, warning him to leave. The figure instead transforms and tells him not to worry since he'll be devoured shortly. Luckily, Rago moves quickly to draw the creature's attention and get it away from the house, and the Mononoke chases after him to keep him from escaping. Jiro is stunned, but has no intention of leaving Rago to face this alone. Rago tries to create distance so he can strike, but the enemy doesn't allow it and slams him into the ground, remarking that he knew Rago was in bad shape, but not this bad. It's pathetic that the legendary Mononoke Rago, the black star of misfortune, has fallen this far. He tells Rago to stop wasting time since it's already taken a lot of effort to break the seal holding him prisoner, and he'd rather not have to kill a fellow Mononoke. Rago decides to go with him, reasoning that if they only want his power, they'll have to earn it, and to do that, they need to be ready to face death. The two clash violently, but Jiro unexpectedly joins the fight, using the family heirloom sword to slice off the Mononoke's arm. Rago demands to know what Jiro thinks he's doing, since this isn't some street brawl. Jiro tells him to be quiet. The wound only enrages the Mononoke further, and it begins to fully transform. Jiro tells Rago that when he helps someone, he means it, so he's not about to leave him to fight alone. Besides, even if he ran, the creature would eventually come after him anyway. The Mononoke admits Jiro is sharper than he looks, since it had indeed planned to kill him afterward, but finds it odd that his true form doesn't seem to faze the boy at all. It's also impressed by his swordsmanship and stealth, and asks if he comes from shinobi lineage, since if so, it will thoroughly enjoy devouring him. The creature charges at Jiro, who manages to dodge and counter with his sword, but in an instant, the Mononoke pierces through his chest, telling him he let his guard down. It urges him to surrender to avoid more suffering, but Jiro fights back and manages to break free, though he ultimately collapses to the ground. Rago approaches and looks down at him, saying he brought this on himself. The Mononoke suggests Rago devour Jiro to restore his own strength, since he must be starving too, but Rago orders it to shut up, since it's about to die. He tells Jiro that he ignored his warning not to get involved, and now his death will have made all of that meaningless. Rago admits he could devour Jiro now and regain his true form, but refuses, since he won't take orders from that insufferable demon. Instead, he decides that this time, Jiro will be the one to devour him. After all, he owes him one, and it's time to pay it back. The Mononoke asks what exactly Rago thinks he's doing as Rago merges into Jiro's body, ordering him to wake up. Meanwhile, the red-haired woman from earlier reports the situation to her boss, who tells her he can already see what's happening from where he is, and that things are about to get complicated. The Mononoke demands to know what Rago just did, giving his power to a human, and a shinobi no less. Jiro gets back up, confused about what's happening and why he has this strange power inside him now, but Rago speaks directly into his mind, telling him to focus and promising to explain everything once they're out of danger. The Mononoke attacks with everything it has, and Jiro dodges while still disoriented. Rago orders him to finish it off, insisting he needs to kill the creature before any explanations can happen. Jiro doesn't know how, but Rago tells him he'll lend a hand, literally instructing him to simply clench his fist. When he does, Jiro unleashes a powerful wave of dark energy that completely destroys the Mononoke's torso, leaving Jiro stunned at what lending a hand actually meant. With the enemy defeated, Jiro demands an explanation, but it will have to wait, since the red-haired woman shows up and orders him not to move or speak. Her boss arrives as well, lamenting that things have taken a turn for the worse again. Jiro asks if he's an ally of that monster, but the man tells him to calm down. They aren't Mononoke. They're members of an intelligence agency, simple government officials. He'll explain the details later, and that he can probably already guess the situation he's in. Jiro isn't willing to be taken quietly, but the curvy, well-built woman knocks him out cold. Her boss addresses her as Ichika and tells her not to overdo it, though Ichika replies that it's only temporary, since they don't want him getting confused and turning aggressive. She asks what they should do with him, and he orders that Jiro be taken to the hospital for testing, adding that they absolutely cannot let him die, since he's now extremely important. It's finally time to move the body, but the agents turn out to be complete cowards. Since Jiro is possessed, Ichika looks at her spineless colleagues in disgust and decides to drag the body away herself. Meanwhile, Jiro finds himself in some kind of hallucination, wondering where on earth he is. He remembers running into a strange cat and then being attacked by a monster. Just then, Rago speaks up, and Jiro asks him why he looks like he's floating. Rago replies by asking if he's even noticed the hole in his chest. Once Jiro registers that, he wakes up with a start. At first, he assumes it was all a dream, but checking his chest confirms otherwise. Right then, Ichika tells him he's been unconscious for a day and a half and quickly reports the news to her boss. Jiro asks who she is, but she simply ignores him and informs Ryusuke that he's woken up and seems fully lucid. Jiro grumbles about being ignored by that awful woman, and just then Rago pipes up in his head agreeing that she's pretty irritating. Meanwhile, Ryusuke approaches the room annoyed that his subordinate hung up on him mid-call, but before entering, he overhears a bit of bickering. When he finally steps in and sees Jiro doing fine, he's relieved and calls him quite the tough kid. He then asks Rago how he's doing, but Rago tells him he has nothing to say to some rude brat. Ryusuke understands that Rago doesn't trust him, but at least he doesn't seem to want to cause harm, which is a relief given what he'd feared. He takes the opportunity to formally introduce himself as Ryusuke Shiba from an intelligence agency. Jiro says he already knows and asks for the explanation they promised him. Shiba agrees to fill him in and asks if he's familiar with the Oniwaban. Jiro answers that they were undercover agents who worked for the shogunate during the Edo period, and Ryusuke is pleasantly surprised by how knowledgeable the boy is. He explains that after the Meiji Restoration, the Oniwaban became loyal to the new government instead of the shogunate. They were an elite group of government secret agents, and that organization still exists today as their intelligence agency. Their duties are essentially foreign espionage and counterintelligence, as well as hunting down and eliminating Mononoke. Since Mononoke rarely cause major incidents these days, most of their recent work has actually involved dealing with humans, protecting public figures, or investigating organizations. However, since their particular division specializes in Mononoke, they usually lead a fairly quiet life. At least that was true until recently, because a group of Mononoke attacked one of their facilities. And to be completely honest, what had been sealed away there was none other than Rago himself. Jiro finally understands why Rago told him he'd been asleep for so long. Now it's Ryusuke's turn to ask questions, and he wants to know exactly how Jiro ended up in this situation. Jiro tells them everything. Ichika can't believe how reckless he was and asks if something's wrong with him, but Jiro snaps back that she has no right to judge since she wasn't even there. While the two of them trade insults, Ryusuke wonders what on earth he's supposed to put in his report. The finer details can wait though, because the pressing issue is that Jiro is now fused with Rago and will essentially remain that way until he dies, since they have absolutely no idea how to reverse it. What they do know is how to search for a solution. And since they also have no idea what the other Mononoke are planning, Ryusuke will personally stay with Jiro to protect him. There's no alternative anyway. Police have already processed his missing person report, and everything is already in motion. He reminds Jiro that they're not like the heroes on TV, they're not obligated to respect his rights, and more importantly, he's not a child anymore, so he needs to take responsibility for his situation. He informs him that he'll be transferred to another facility the next day, and before leaving the room, he mentions that the entire hospital falls under his jurisdiction, meaning there are soldiers stationed everywhere. With that, he takes his leave. Just before Ichika walks out, Jiro notices the dog with her, though Ichika just glances at him and leaves without a word. A little later, Jiro realizes he's essentially a prisoner in that room. And to make matters worse, he's now officially a missing person. He wonders what will happen if he's stuck like this forever. Thinking about his grandfather, Rago reminds him that he warned him about this. But Jiro insisted on getting involved anyway. Jiro tells him not to lecture him, and Rago clarifies that's not what he meant. What's done is done. Even though that idiot Ryusuke claims all of this is for his protection, Jiro needs to think it through carefully. Ryusuke's group were the ones who sealed Rago away in the first place, so Jiro seriously doubts they'll treat him well now that he's fused with a Mononoke. And beyond the intelligence agency, there's also the rest of the Mononoke who came after Rago. the ones who woke him up, knowing full well they'd eventually have to answer to the agency for it. However he looks at it, he's completely alone right now, surrounded by people who are either furious with him or trying to use him for their own ends. At that point, Jiro lets out a frustrated shout. Rago asks if he's okay, and Jiro admits he's fed up with everyone doing whatever they please with him, so he's decided he'll start doing whatever he wants to. Rago asks if he's planning to run away, since he himself has no interest in fleeing. But Jiro tells him he plans to fight and give them all a beating instead. Rago warns him that he has no intention of saving him if things go wrong, but Jiro already has a plan. He uses the crows to distract the guards and makes his escape. Later that evening, as the sun sets, he thanks the crows and hands over the snacks he promised them. He then heads home, since he has something important to take care of. Telling his grandfather everything that happened, Rago asks if he's really sure his grandfather will believe him, and Jiro says he's confident he will. He asks Rago to lie low for a bit, and just as he's about to step onto the property, his grandfather appears behind him. Jiro tries to explain that he had to leave because of some things that came up, but he can't get into all the details. It's complicated. His grandfather simply orders him to follow without another word. A while later, after arriving at a baseball field, Jiro asks why they've come to this particular spot, and his grandfather explains that it's because no one will be able to interfere there right before landing a solid hit on him. He asks Jiro if he has any idea what he's done. Jiro, dazed, has no clue what just happened and regrets leaving, but doesn't think that warranted getting hit. His grandfather then reveals that Ryusuke Shiba already told him everything, that he knows Jiro is possessed by a Mononoke, and that the intelligence agency is after him. Startled, Jiro asks how he could possibly know that, and his grandfather explains that it's because he himself used to be a member of that same intelligence agency. Just then, Rago appears, remarking that it made sense now an old man that eager to kill wasn't just an ordinary grandfather. Seeing him confirms everything for the old man. He never would have believed it without seeing it firsthand. But now he knows exactly what he has to do: take responsibility for his grandson's mistake. He refuses to let either the intelligence agency or a Mononoke take advantage of Jiro. So he intends to destroy Rago along with him, and once that's done, he'll end his own life as well. Rago comments that this old man is something else. Jiro dodges an attack as Rago continues, saying there's no stopping him. Jiro agrees, adding that he's never seen his grandfather this furious before. In a single instant, the old man delivers a brutal beating and tells his grandson that the Azuma family has spent generations perfecting their technique, a martial art every bit as lethal against Mononoke as it is against humans. He admits he only ever taught Jiro the basics, enough for self-defense, but given the current situation, he's the one who will destroy him. Rago warns Jiro to be careful, but given how things are going, he'll have to step in himself since Jiro isn't reacting. The grandfather comes in for a killing blow, but Rago blocks it and scolds Jiro, telling him to focus since his grandfather is genuinely trying to kill him. Rago wants to help, but insists Jiro needs to handle the rest himself. Jiro, however, grabs him and tells him not to interfere. He'd already told him earlier not to come out unless he said so. Annoyed, Rago tells him to do whatever he wants then. His grandfather suddenly recalls that his old dog once warned him it wasn't the time to be sitting around reading, because Jiro was in danger, meaning the old man can also talk to animals, or at least to that particular dog. We then see a flashback of young Jiro falling out of a tree, saved at the last second by his grandfather, who scolds him harshly afterward. Jiro explains that a kitten had gotten stuck and couldn't climb down, crying in distress, and he couldn't just leave it there alone. His grandfather tells him that helping others is a noble thing, but it also requires strength and resolve. Without strength, it's reckless, and without resolve, it's irresponsible. He tells Jiro that he's still too young and lacking in both, and that as long as he remains that way, he needs to ask the people around him for help. Jiro asks what he's supposed to do if there's no one nearby, and his grandfather, a little exasperated by his backtalk, tells him that in the worst case, he should simply give up. Jiro refuses to accept that, so his grandfather concludes that the only option left is for him to grow stronger, both physically and mentally. But until then, he shouldn't take unnecessary risks. Back in the present, his grandfather tells him that this isn't some street fight or training exercise, it's a blood duel to the death for their respective goals. That's simply how the world Jiro has stepped into works. He'll have to slaughter fellow Mononoke, and in doing so, kill the person he used to be, because he's now part of a world of shadows, a realm without a trace of light. The very same world his grandfather fought so hard to protect him from ever having to set foot in. Jiro apologizes, admitting he acted without thinking and was foolish, but says he doesn't regret any of it. He got himself into this, and he's the one who will see it through. Frustrated, his grandfather attacks with everything he has while Rago warns that this is extremely dangerous. Jiro accepts the apology as fair, but asks him to hold on just a little longer. Right before his grandfather can land another solid hit, Jiro headbutts him, though he ends up sent flying, landing with style nonetheless. Rago asks him what on earth he's thinking, and his grandfather asks the exact same thing, telling him that looking at him now, he still sees the same helpless little boy he once was. Jiro replies that for better or worse, he's no longer alone, and just as he was taught, that means asking the people close to him for help when he needs it. And right now, that means Reigo, whether he likes it or not. His grandfather is caught off guard, while Reigo just stands there stunned. Jiro tells him it's nothing. He knows exactly what he's talking about. As the two of them keep bickering, his grandfather recalls the very lesson he once taught Jiro, and realizes that to him, labels like human, animal, or even Mononoke simply don't matter. His grandson treats everyone the same. He remarks that he's still the same stubborn little brat who always talks back, and ultimately decides to back down, realizing that maybe he's the one lacking resolve here. He tells Jiro he can do as he pleases. A little later, back at the house, Jiro winces in the bath from all the hits his grandfather landed on him, and takes the opportunity to apologize to Rago for dragging him into his business. Rago just laughs it off, pointing out that he was the one who took the beating, not Jiro. Still, he warns that everyone has their limits, and Jiro had better not get himself killed through recklessness, because if he dies again, it'll mean Rago saved him for nothing. A little embarrassed, Rago adds that if things get really bad, Jiro is welcome to borrow his powers, and he'd better be grateful for it. Jiro smiles, and even though he has no idea what's coming next, he's glad there are two of them facing it together, hoping they can get along well as partners. Elsewhere, Shiba contacts the old man, who notably is completely worn out, to let him know a vehicle will be sent for him the next day. The old man finds this unusually generous, and Shiba replies that of course they do, since they fully trust him, addressing him respectfully, and admits that hearing Jiro had escaped from the hospital actually came as a relief. Toshimasa asks what he means by that. The old man's name, incidentally, is Toshimasa, though Ryusuke asks him not to make him spell it out. He tells him that Jiro is going to become one of them, a fighter and a pioneer. Exactly the kind of person they need right now. With that, he ends the call, while in the background, Jiro can be heard yelling at his grandfather that they're out of soap, with his grandfather irritably telling him to wait. The next day, while Jiro is packing his things, Rago asks if he's really sure about this, since neither of them knows what's waiting for them, and this might even be the last time he sees this place. Jiro asks if he's actually worried about him, which makes Rago noticeably flustered. Jiro shrugs it off, saying there's no point being afraid, they just have to keep moving forward. When he sees who's come to pick him up, though, he can't help wondering what she's doing there. She makes it clear she's his bodyguard and escort, adding that she'll also be making sure he doesn't try to run off again, ordering him into the waiting truck. Jiro mutters that she's just bossy, and after saying goodbye to his grandfather and telling him not to drop dead while he's away, he heads off toward his new adventure. A while later, on the way to their destination, Jiro asks Ichika why on earth he has to wear this thing. She just ignores him, silently wondering why she got stuck being this guy's escort. Jiro demands she answer him and asks again why she put that on him. She tells him to be quiet, pointing out that he's essentially a prisoner now since he's no longer human, just a monster. Half human, half Mononoke. She admits she doesn't know what her boss or the higher-ups are thinking, but she's a professional who takes her job seriously. So, if she's been assigned as his bodyguard, she'll carry out her duties, even if that means protecting some pathetic half-Mononoke. Jiro complains that now she's calling him a monster, muttering that he only held back earlier because she's a girl. Just then, there's a sudden impact, and the co-driver asks the driver if he heard something. But he brushes it off as his imagination, though it clearly wasn't. Jiro nearly gets his head taken clean off. Ichika makes it very clear there are exactly two things that annoy her, Mononoke and sexist men like him. She says she barely even acknowledges his existence and tells him to shut his mouth for good. Just then, Rago appears and tells them both to be quiet, complaining that with brats like this around, he never gets any peace. Admitting he's surprised, the agency sent someone so young to escort them, he figures they must be short-staffed. Ichika snaps at him to be quiet too, since something like him has no right to speak to her. Rago notes that the girl's got some spirit, but suggests she worry about other things right now, because at that moment the truck is suddenly swallowed by a thick fog. The driver switches on the fog lights to see better, and spots something enormous on the road. When he turns to check on his partner, the man is already decapitated. The truck crashes immediately, and Ichika steps out to investigate and realizes from the fog that they've entered a spectral zone, quickly sensing the presence of Mononoke nearby. One of the Mononoke complains that it was hoping for tastier prey, disappointed that the two agency operatives don't live up to expectations. Seeing that the bodyguard is just a young girl only adds to its disappointment in the agency, which infuriates Ichika since she's sick of constantly being called girl or kid. She responds by transforming, activating her ranger-style combat suit. The Mononoke transform as well, and once cloaked in the fog, reveal their true forms ready to enjoy their meal. Ichika proves to have impressive skill and agility, managing to dodge one attacker's strike while going on the offensive against the larger one. Her attacks land, but only superficially, and things get complicated with two different types of Mononoke to deal with at once. She figures she should target the leaner one first, but it's already behind her, slamming her into the truck. Jiro, confused, asks what's happening outside, and Rogo explains that there are Mononoke nearby. His senses picked up on the fact that they'd entered a spectral zone, explaining that foggy areas can temporarily turn into a spectral realm, a dimension separate from the human world, the domain of the Mononoke. Alarmed, Jiro asks Rogo to help him get out of his restraints, but Rogo tells him he can't, since those shackles are special, designed specifically to block spectral energy. Jiro is frustrated, realizing he needs to get outside so Ichika can remove them, but Rogo advises against it, asking if he still doesn't understand why he's wearing those restraints in the first place. He reveals that the agency and the Mononoke are essentially the same in one respect. Both only want to use them, seeing them as nothing more than tools. So there's no real reason to get involved in this fight. The smartest move, Rogo argues, would be to let them destroy each other and then simply leave. But true to form, Jiro tells him he doesn't get it at all, since he doesn't care about the agency or the Mononoke. Right now, all that matters to him is that the woman out there is fighting for their sake, and as a man, he can't just stand by and do nothing. The giant Mononoke lands a devastating blow on the truck, destroying it completely and sending Jiro flying. Rogo mocks him, pointing out that after that whole speech, he ended up looking pretty pathetic. The Mononoke notices him and mentions that it's under orders to bring him in alive, giving him only 10 seconds to leave peacefully. Otherwise, it'll devour him. It starts counting down while Ichika wonders how they possibly could have known about this transport. Jiro interrupts her thoughts, asking her to remove his restraints so he can help. Ichika retorts that she doesn't need the filthy powers of a Mononoke to handle the situation. The giant Mononoke charges at them, while Jiro keeps shouting at her to take off the restraint. Frustrated, she resists, unwilling to release him. And in that moment, we cut to a flashback of her as a child standing before a grave with her father. Everyone around them remarked what a shame it was, since Ichika, only 5 years old at the time, was the last of the line, and women couldn't inherit leadership. Even so, despite being so young, she dropped her stuffed animal and told her father that she would take over as heir to the Kishimojin clan, promising to work as hard as she could to become a great detective and make everyone proud of her. Back in the present, Jiro snaps her out of the memory, asking if she wasn't the one who claimed to take her job seriously and always fulfill her duties no matter what, because if that's true, then she needs to do whatever it takes to complete her mission, since that's what being a professional means. Ichika understands and quickly releases him. As they dodge the giant's next attack, Jiro, now free and fused with Rago's power, tears the giant Mononoke apart, while Ichika finishes off the other one in a single clean strike. With the situation under control, Ichika makes it very clear she has no intention of thanking him. Rago comments that she's an incredibly ungrateful girl, but Jiro says he doesn't need her thanks and has no plans to offer his either. She fought to protect them, and they fought to help her, so they're even. Hearing this, Ichika tells him she actually has a name, introduces herself properly, and tells him never to forget it. She'd rather he stop calling her "Hey You" and start using her actual name. Jiro agrees and asks what they're supposed to do now, and she tells him they'll just have to walk. Meanwhile, Ryusuke submits a report on everything they know about Rago and Jiro, and also informs the higher-ups that he has a proposal. As head of the 2nd Special Division, he formally requests permission to form a new team, with Jiro Azuma as one of its detectives. The higher-ups ask if he's lost his mind, wanting to turn a half-Mononoke into a secret agent. Ryusuke explains that Rago hasn't shown any direct hostility so far and actually appears to be cooperating with Jiro. Either way, it's clear the enemy is after Rago specifically, so instead of letting him rot in confinement, they could use him as the perfect bait. Jiro also comes from shinobi lineage, and since the agency has mostly only been facing harmless humans lately, Jiro already has a natural advantage, and Ryusuke is confident that combat experience will only sharpen his skills further. Ryusuke takes full responsibility for this new asset, revealing his plan for a small experimental unit of 5 operatives, including himself. The unit will include Hana Usami as his assistant, along with another rookie, forming a special anti-Mononoke unit codenamed Black Torch. He asks the higher-ups what they think of the plan. In a scene change, we see Jiro brushing his teeth, reflecting on how in just 1 week he ran into a strange cat that turned out to be a Mononoke, nearly got killed by a giant Mononoke, and was essentially saved by a cat. It's been an absurd week, but here he is regardless. Ryusuke walks up and asks how he's settling into his new life, and Jiro replies that he doesn't need to be watched so closely since he's not planning to run. Ryusuke reminds him that he did in fact escape from the hospital once already. But Jiro changes the subject, complaining that he has no life left since he's been subjected to every kind of test imaginable since arriving. Ryusuke acknowledges this but explains it's for everyone's benefit, both the agency's and his own. Jiro accepts that and asks if this is really their headquarters. Ryusuke admits that unfortunately it is, or at least the 2nd Division's base. He explains that each division has its own operational headquarters, and while they function like any ordinary company or organization on the outside, he has to admit this one is the ugliest of them all. Jiro jokes that they must have had better days, and Ryusuke corrects him, not they, but we. reminding him that he's now officially part of the team, the Black Torch unit. Jiro replies that he's only there to save his own skin, not to become anyone's subordinate. His goal is for everyone involved, including Rago, to eventually live freely, and he's willing to fight whoever necessary to make that happen, Mononoke included. Ryusuke watches him and figures it'll take some time to fully process everything, since ordinary logic doesn't seem to apply to Jiro. Just then, Ryusuke's assistant, Hana Usami, the 2nd Division's deputy chief, arrives along with the new rookie, who comes across as quite the gentleman. Jiro asks Ryusuke who this flatterer is, and Ryusuke tells him he'll be his new teammate. He introduces the rookie Reiji Kirihara, who, like the rest of them, is 17 years old and comes from a famous family of spies. Ichika comments that she only takes orders and won't put up with another troublemaker. Reiji, however, is smooth with his words, praising her as a brave, ambitious young woman who broke her clan's tradition to lead it herself, adding that she's also quite pretty, and poor Ichika falls for it completely, though Jiro points out he's obviously just flattering her. When Reiji turns his attention to Jiro, though, he admits he'd already heard about him, but seeing him in person is somehow even worse than expected. He looks at Jiro with clear disdain, asking what a nuisance like him is doing in their unit, and suggesting he go back to the hospital he came from. Jiro stands up and dares him to repeat that. Reiji replies that honesty is the best policy and calls him a half-monster. Ichika senses the tension rising between them and comments that things are getting out of hand. Usami grows worried and tells Ryusuke they should step in and stop it, but Ryusuke sees it as the perfect opportunity instead, egging them on, calling Reiji Four Eyes and Jiro Half-Monster, and telling them to settle it right then and there as long as they take it seriously. Once outside, the two boys prepare to fight while Ryusuke explains to the girls that this is essentially a duel, and that it will also help solidify the team since the higher-ups had a few conditions when he pitched the idea. One of them was proving that this arrangement would actually be useful to the agency, since none of it matters if Jiro and Rago can't cooperate with the rest of the unit. That makes this the perfect chance to test him against another agent and see just how strong he really is. Usami gets ready to film the fight, planning to use the footage as evidence to show the higher-ups. Jiro complains, asking Shiba why that jerk gets to use a weapon. Shiba explains that it's because his family comes from a lineage of master swordsmen, and back when the agency was formally tied to the Oniwaban, they trained the shogunate in swordsmanship and other martial arts. He tells Jiro that if he feels this puts him at a disadvantage, he's free to use whatever he wants to. Jiro says that won't be necessary. Reiji chimes in that Jiro may not have a sword, but he does have his own weapon, and he knows exactly what it is. Jiro tells him not to say anything stupid. Rago isn't a tool, and besides, he doesn't need Rago's help to win this fight. Before the match starts, Jiro tells Rago not to interfere, and Rago agrees, deciding to just take a nap. Reiji then drops his sword and turns his back, calling the whole thing ridiculous, saying he's giving Jiro a handicap on purpose just so the fight isn't a complete joke, and that he doesn't even need to look at him. This sets Jiro off, and unable to hold back any longer, he charges at Reiji, leaping high into the air to strike from above. The girls assume this is so. His footsteps won't give away his position, though Shiba remarks that they're overestimating him. Rago, meanwhile, thinks to himself that for a swordsman, distance from the opponent is everything. Mediocre fencers rely only on what they can see and hear, but the best ones have a sixth sense. Sure enough, Reiji grabs his sword in an instant and lands a solid hit on Jiro. Shiba notes that Reiji has a full 360-degree awareness, meaning he essentially has no blind spots, and Ichika admits she's impressed. Reiji decides to end the fight there, worried that continuing could actually get this useless opponent killed. Having exceptional power is one thing, but if that power is wasted on someone incompetent, it's worthless. Shiba gestures for him to look behind, and Jiro gets back up, saying that hit merely tickled, and that Reiji's little sword tricks are nothing compared to the beatings his grandfather used to give him. Reiji takes offense, since his swordsmanship is the product of centuries of sacrifice and talent, refined purely through bloodshed, and a comment like that, he says, is something people pay for with their lives. Jiro just smiles and invites him to try, while Shiba tells Usami to make sure she's recording everything, since it's about to get good. Jiro charges straight at Reiji, and Ichika wonders aloud if he's lost his mind. Reiji swings with everything he has, but his sword shatters. He's stunned to realize Jiro was actually aiming for the sword itself the whole time, and then gets sent flying by a follow-up hit. Reiji realizes Jiro must have calculated the reach of his first attack, but can't understand how he broke a wooden sword so easily. His counterattack shouldn't have been fast enough to match his own strike, meaning Jiro must have anticipated the attack in advance. Jiro tells him they're now tied 1-1. And since Reiji no longer has his little stick, he might as well give up, teasingly calling him Rich Boy and offering him a soda if he surrenders. Reiji tells him not to be ridiculous. This is only just getting started. Excited, Jiro wastes no time, and the two start trading clean punches. Ichika asks Shiba if this will actually be enough to convince the higher-ups to approve his request, and he admits it at least demonstrates strength and tenacity, while Usami watches, thoroughly entertained by two guys settling things with their fists. After a while, Reiji gets up off the ground, having been knocked briefly unconscious. Jiro asks how he's doing, mentioning that the others already went back inside and he's the only one who just woke up. Reiji figures that since he woke up first, that means he won. Jiro tosses him the soda and admits that, thinking it over calmly, he could have actually killed him with his very first attack, and his little trick with the sword only worked because it happened to be made of wood, meaning technically this fight should count as a win for Reiji. Reiji smiles, remarking that Jiro sounds like a kid, and then gets doused when he opens the soda, which had clearly been shaken up. Jiro cracks up laughing at how easily he fell for it. Furious, Reiji smashes the empty can over his head. Usami wonders if that footage will really be enough to convince the higher-ups, but Shiba admits he never actually intended to convince anyone with the video. The real test will come the next day, once they're out on the job, since that's when they'll actually see how well the two of them work together. Usami feels it's too soon to send them out on a real mission, but Shiba insists there's nothing quite like real-world experience. Usami points out that the higher-ups haven't actually assigned them a mission, but Shiba, ever calculating, tells her he'll simply invent one. And if things go well, maybe their true enemy will reveal itself in the process. Sometime later, Shiba tells the boys to hurry up, and they head out of the building already dressed in their work gear. Ichika asks Shiba why she has to come along too, and he explains it's because her uniform just got repaired and they need to make sure it's working properly. He tells everyone to hold down the button on their left wrist, and when they do, their clothing changes. Shiba explains that's the quantum camouflage mode, then has them press it twice more. Jiro tries it and turns semi-transparent, and Shiba clarifies that only he can see himself that way to everyone else. He's completely invisible. That's the stealth mode. The downside is that quantum camouflage mode drastically reduces the efficiency of their spy equipment. Reiji figures which mode they use should depend on the situation, and once the explanations are done, Shiba orders everyone into the car to head to the mission site. Before leaving, he puts Usami in charge of the facility. A little later, the group finds themselves at a temple going through some kind of prayer ritual. Jiro asks Shiba what any of this has to do with the mission, and Shiba explains that first they need to drive out any malicious spirits, which leaves Ichika and Jiro completely baffled. Reiji, using his head as usual, guesses that this temple must be another branch of the intelligence agency. Shiba confirms he's right and calls him Four Eyes, and without wasting more time, they head to the office. On the way, Jiro notices the presence of someone nearby while Shiba is off apologizing to one of the agents. The group quickly realizes their boss never announced their arrival ahead of time, and once they reach the area, the agent tells them this isn't good. Since the 1st Division is scheduled to visit that same day, he'd already told Shiba over the phone, and having two squads show up at once could cause problems. Curious, Jiro asks Ichika what exactly the 1st Division is, and she explains that it's the 1st Special Division. The director oversees the whole agency and manages the various division chiefs, but out of all the divisions, the 1st is considered the elite, the one with the most agents and the most authority. As they enter the storage area, Reiji asks Shiba exactly what they're looking for, and Shiba opens a hidden door, leading them down a staircase. As they descend, Ichika realizes where they're headed, and Shiba asks Rago how he's doing. Rago warns Shiba not to underestimate him, though Shiba calmly tells him to relax since he isn't looking for trouble. Everyone quickly realizes Shiba has brought them to the 7th Sealing Shrine, the very place where Rago had been sealed. He explains that the massive rock there is made entirely of death obsidian, an extremely rare stone that holds spectral energy. And while there are several other sealing shrines built from that same obsidian, none of them come close to this one in size. He announces it's time to begin the mission. He and Ichika will go interview possible witnesses, while Reiji and Jiro stay behind to see if they can get Rigo to recall what happened the day he was taken from that shrine. Reiji objects, since he'd rather go with Ichika, but Shiba completely ignores him and leaves with her anyway. A little later, Ichika asks Shiba if he thinks those two will be fine on their own, and he replies that things will actually go more smoothly without the two of them interfering with each other. Besides, this is exactly the moment they need to be able to lay everything out honestly between them. Back with the boys, Rago mentions that being near that massive rock puts him in a foul mood. Jiro asks why he was sealed there in the first place, but Rago says he doesn't remember. Jiro accuses him of lying, which irritates Rago. He insists he's telling the truth and has no reason to lie to them. He genuinely doesn't remember anything from before he was locked away. Reiji points out that amnesia isn't actually that far-fetched, since he's seen it happen before. He explains that Mononoke who've been sealed away for a long time tend to come back as mere shadows of what they once were, meaning that when a Mononoke gets sealed, it's forced to possess something else instead. He explains that the act of possession consumes so much of a Mononoke's energy that they become unable to break the spell on their own. Under normal circumstances, Mononoke possess and inhabit living beings, but when sealed, they're forced into inanimate objects instead. For a Mononoke, being trapped inside an object like that is essentially an eternal prison, and if that object happens to be Death Obsidian, it becomes an absolute hell, unable to move, left in total darkness while its spectral energy slowly drains away. Reiji notes, it's hard to say exactly how long Rago was trapped there, but if amnesia is the only lasting effect, he actually got off lucky. Since dwelling on the past won't help, now he asks Rago to describe whatever he does remember from that day. Meanwhile, Shiba meets with the temple's caretaker, who shows him the security footage. At a certain point, all the cameras cut out for about 10 minutes. Even though there was nothing wrong with the electrical system, they suspect it must have been some kind of spectral barrier. Shiba asks the caretaker how many agents were on duty that day, and he says there were only 2, but when they heard a noise and went to investigate, they found nothing. A while later, Shiba admits they haven't really learned much of anything, though something about the crime scene doesn't sit right with him. He decides it's best to regroup with the others, back with the boys. Rago tells them the first thing he remembers is the cold of the stone. Then, cracking his eyes open, he sensed a group of Mononoke surrounding him, along with some kind of glowing tablet, and a voice spoke to him as if they already knew each other. The boys figure the glowing tablet must have been some kind of device, and whoever spoke to him was likely the group's leader. Rago explains that the person was a total stranger to him, and told him that things had changed, that Mononoke had barely managed to survive, and that they'd come looking for him because they needed his power to restore the Mononoke's dignity, and unleash their strength, not just against ordinary, pathetic humans, but against their true enemy, the intelligence agency. Rago tells the boys he told the man to get lost, and once he left, Rago used the opportunity to escape. Jiro figures they're back to square one, but Reiji corrects him, pointing out that this account actually revealed 3 important things. First, whoever freed Rago clearly knows how to break the seal. Second, there's the person with the tablet, who seemed to already know Rago from before he was ever imprisoned. And third, the enemy's motive is fairly clear: revenge against humans and the agency. While he can't say for certain, the way that person referred to their enemies makes him suspect this is personal, driven by vengeance. Jiro tells Reiji to stop, since his brain can't process that much information at once. But after taking a moment to think it through, he manages to piece together that the enemy hunting for Rago likely knows how to undo their fusion, that Rago has amnesia, but that this enemy clearly knew him beforehand. With that figured out, Jiro decides he knows exactly what to do: smash through anyone who gets in his way. If the enemy won't come to them, he'll just go find them himself, and the problem will solve itself easily enough. Reiji smiles, then scolds him for being a complete idiot, pointing out that the whole reason they're investigating is because they don't even know who they're supposed to be looking for. Before long, the two start arguing again while Rago simply watches unimpressed. Suddenly, the mysterious figure from earlier appears in the room. The boys wonder how an outsider managed to get in, though Jiro remembers seeing him before. In an instant, the stranger appears behind them, greeting Rago and telling him he wanted to see him. The boys immediately move to attack, but he's far too fast for them. Rago warns Jiro to be extremely careful. They both realize this is another Mononoke. Without wasting time, they brace themselves, since the enemy has shown up in person, and it's time to make him pay for it. Meanwhile, Ichika and Shiba discover they've been found out. The entrance to the shrine is now blocked off by a powerful barrier. Shiba tries to think of a way through, when Kusumi Toko, head of the 1st Division, suddenly appears and asks him exactly what all of this is supposed to mean. The Mononoke suddenly remembers he hasn't introduced himself, and does so now. Koga, the future most powerful Mononoke to ever exist. To get there, though, he'll need a bit of extra power first, which is exactly why he's decided Rago will be his. Rago looks at him like he's some kind of weirdo, while Jiro taunts him, asking what he could possibly want with Rago. Reiji, for his part, wonders if this Mononoke is just another idiot, since that would make things much easier. He tries to fish for information, asking why Koga is so fixated on Rago specifically. Koga replies that humans are pretty dense, if they need to ask. Since the reason is obvious, Rago is simply the best. He explains that Mononoke aren't as fragile as humans and are essentially near immortal. While it's true they can die if completely destroyed, and their spectral energy weakens if they go too long without feeding, Rago is different. He's like an endless wellspring of spiritual energy that never runs dry, fed or not. That's exactly why Koga wants to claim him. With Rago by his side, he'd become a true immortal, fearing no one, and would finally rise as the supreme Mononoke. The group braces for battle, but in an instant, Koga kicks Reiji clean off his feet and slams Jiro into the ground before grabbing Rago, telling him they should talk privately without these nuisances getting in the way. He tells Rago he'll free him from that meat sack before he even notices, so the two of them can finally merge into one being, unstoppable, indestructible, the future king of Mononoke. Rago makes it very clear he belongs to no one and has zero interest in being king of anything, and if that's what Koga wants, he should go pursue it on his own. Koga bursts into tears, asking why Rago would say something so hurtful when all he's trying to do is free him from that meat sack. Just then, Jiro grabs Koga's leg and signals Reiji to make his move. Reiji immediately strikes at Koga with a special technique, but Koga dodges, barely getting nicked. Jiro tells Reiji that was an impressive move, and Reiji admits he was actually aiming to cut Koga clean in half but only managed to scratch, meaning this guy is seriously strong. He points out that the others will figure out they're trapped soon enough, but they can't afford to just wait around, so they need to do everything they can to take this idiot down. Koga, annoyed, tells them to shut up, saying, "This is exactly why he hates humans, a bunch of weaklings who think they're hot stuff just because there are more of them than there are Mononoke." He's tired of playing around, though, and it's time to get serious. He tells Jiro he won't kill him since he needs him alive to extract Rago, but he will tear him apart completely and turn him into a bag. Reiji, on the other hand, he'll be sending straight to the afterlife, just to make it crystal clear who's really in charge. After losing a fair amount of blood, he summons his weapon and readies himself for the fight. Meanwhile, Tokieda, the elderly man, examines the barrier and tells the group that while it isn't the most elegant work he's ever seen, it's still quite sturdy, so breaking through will take some time. Ichika asks how she can help, worried her teammates might be in danger and unwilling to just stand around doing nothing. Tokieda hands her some stakes, giving her instructions so they can work together to break the barrier open as quickly as possible. Shiba, meanwhile, is grateful that Toko brought Tokieda along, since with his help it'll be like that barrier never existed. Toko, however, grabs him roughly, suspecting that Shiba intended to use Tokieda as backup from the very beginning, her instincts telling her he only came to this location because he knew they'd show up. Shiba asks what kind of leader he'd be if he hadn't come prepared, and Toko points out that he seems remarkably calm considering his rookies are currently in danger. He replies that it's because he trusts them, and he trusts her too. Toko makes it clear that he'll be the one taking full responsibility for this entire operation. Shiba agrees. Back with the boys, they're doing their best to dodge Koga's relentless attacks, but in an instant he strikes, shattering Reiji's sword and following up with a brutal hit to the stomach that knocks him out cold. Jiro steps in immediately, channeling Rago's power to strike at Koga, but Koga easily deflects it. Disappointed, complaining that Jiro has access to all of Rago's power and still can't land a decent hit. He sends Jiro flying with another blow, then turns to Rago, telling him it breaks his heart to see him wasting his power on that meat sack. He promises he'll get him out of there personally, so Rago should just wait. Jiro gets back up and tells Koga to shut up. Since he's only saying whatever benefits him, all Koga wants is to use people and discard them. But Jiro and Rago aren't objects, and they don't belong to him. It makes no difference to Jiro whether someone is Mononoke or human. Everyone gets to decide for themselves what they are. He asks Rago what he thinks, and Rago smiles, admitting that Jiro usually talks nonsense, but this time he's actually right. And with that, he begins channeling a massive surge of energy into Jiro so they can finally get rid of this obnoxious creep. Jiro charges at Koga with overwhelming power, and Koga takes the hit head-on, visibly stunned by the force of it. Unfortunately, once the smoke clears, Koga simply strides forward with a grin, telling them that's exactly the kind of thrill he was hoping for. He demands Jiro hand Rago over, since he wants that power for himself. Just then, a loud crash echoes through the shrine, and Koga realizes the barrier outside has been broken. Not wanting to deal with reinforcements, he decides on a strategic retreat. Jiro calls him a coward, but Koga corrects him. He's leaving because he chooses to. But before leaving, he asks Jiro for his name, promising that next time he'll take Rago for himself and turn Jiro into a bag. Jiro gives his full name, and upon hearing his surname, Koga looks genuinely surprised, breaking into a smile. Recognizing the Azuma ninja clan name, he remarks that it all makes sense now. Jiro must be that man's son. He adds, though, that it's none of his business and decides to leave, promising they'll meet again soon. Jiro is left with more questions than answers. A little later, before heading out, Shiba thanks Toko, but she reminds him that 2 agents were injured during an unauthorized operation, and there's also damaged property to account for. So, as she already warned him, he'll be the one dealing with the consequences. Shiba accepts full responsibility, though he also mentions that those 2 agents deserve some credit, since they held their own against a seriously strong Mononoke despite being total rookies. Toko simply replies that they did exactly what was expected of them and leaves. Looking at the boys, Shiba privately feels they more than proved themselves, though he notices Reiji looking pretty shaken. He asks how he's doing, and Reiji admits that if it weren't for his uniform, he would have died. He thinks he was naive and needs to get stronger. Ichika, meanwhile, feels like she couldn't do anything useful, regretting that if she'd had the strength to break that barrier herself, her teammates wouldn't have ended up in that situation. Jiro, for his part, keeps replaying Koga's comment about him being that man's son, wondering who he could possibly mean, since as far as he remembers, his only parent has always been his grandfather, and his mother was the dog. He grumbles about how complicated everything has become, but then declares that he's made up his mind about something. Shiba asks what exactly he's decided, and Jiro answers that he intends to become a real agent, though the others point out that he already is one. Shiba tells him that's exactly the point. Feeling like part of the group matters. They've all been a team since the moment they joined, so they'll need to work together going forward. He reminds them that everyone has their own thoughts and feelings, and that's precisely the kind of strength that will keep them grounded. They still have a lot to learn and grow through, but he'll be there supporting them along the way. Sometime later, back at headquarters, Shiba looks noticeably worn down after getting chewed out by the higher-ups. Still, there's work to do, and that day marks the start of a new mission. He tells the team they'll be doing a somewhat unconventional but classic style of training that day, which is why he brought in someone special. From the ceiling of the facility, a small blue-haired girl suddenly starts cackling like a maniac before leaping down and crash-landing right in front of them. Moments later, Shiba introduces her as Fuyo, a Mononoke. He'd already explained before that the agency's job is to monitor and eliminate Mononoke, but for the more cooperative ones, they take a somewhat friendlier approach instead. As they talk, Fuyo notices Rago and remarks that he's actually pretty adorable for someone so infamous. Rago replies that he'd be offended if her opinion actually mattered to him, since she's nothing but a nobody. Fuyo takes offense, and the two immediately start bickering, prompting Shiba to move things along to the important part. Once everyone has their gear ready, he explains that today's training is meant to build resistance against supernatural effects, since some Mononoke are capable of causing hypnosis and hallucinations, and it's far better to train for that in a controlled, safe environment before facing it out in the field. That's where Fuyo comes in to help. She quickly activates her power, wrapping the group in some kind of flower-like effect. The team doesn't get much explanation of how exactly her powers work, but Shiba figures a realistic simulated environment will teach them more effectively, and besides, they're all strong enough that it shouldn't go too badly for them. In his hallucination, Reiji finds himself inside a cave, from which his brother emerges, someone who, as far as he knows, is dead. Reiji tenses up but reminds himself this is only a hallucination and he can't afford to let it rattle him. His brother remarks that it's been a while, then immediately attacks, warning Reiji that he'll need far more than that sword to actually kill him. Meanwhile, in her own hallucination, Ichika finds herself as a child, watering plants alongside her mother. She tells her mother she wants to become an agent, just like her and her father, but her mother tells her that's far too dangerous, and that she'd much rather Ichika grow up to be a florist, or something along those lines. Ichika, however, is completely set on becoming an agent. From a distance, present-day Ichika watches these old memories play out until a maid arrives to fetch her mother, who has just been assigned a new mission. For young Ichika, it seemed like an ordinary day, but her mother never came back. She now finds herself at her mother's funeral. Reflecting on how long it took her to accept that her mother was truly gone, that was the moment everything changed for her, and she threw herself into training, desperate to grow stronger and become an agent herself. She became consumed by that goal, and once she finally earned her official position, her family's maid, Nishina, came to tell her that her father wanted her to come with her. Nishina brought her to a facility and showed her a statue, revealing that the statue was, in fact, her mother herself trapped inside. Nishina then reads her a letter from her father, apologizing for waiting so long to tell her the truth. He explains he had to keep it secret for the agency's sake, since no civilian could be allowed to learn about it. But now that she's an agent herself, he could finally tell her everything. As impossible as it might sound, her mother is still alive, trapped inside that stone. The Mononoke responsible for petrifying her, however, remains at large. He reveals that over the past decade, they've tried every method they could think of to free her, without success. He admits he never wanted to break the news this way, and wished he could have been there with her. But as much as it pains him, he simply couldn't, and he can only hope she'll forgive him someday. Ichika touches the statue, silently vowing to herself that she'll free her mother one day. Suddenly, though, the statue begins to move, and as it cracks open, a monster emerges from within. Meanwhile, in Jiro's own hallucination, he's running desperately, demanding to know what kind of twisted place this is. Rago warns him to be careful as an enormous black creature appears before them. Jiro asks what on earth that thing is, while Rago finds himself with the strange nagging feeling that despite this all being just a small hallucination that can't possibly be real, he's somehow seen this creature before. Jiro remarks that this whole situation is a massive pain, and since there's no door in sight anywhere, they have no choice but to take the thing down. We now get a look into Reiji's past, back before he ever joined the intelligence agency. At the time, he's still just an ordinary kid, at least as ordinary as anyone can be growing up in a family of Mononoke hunters. We're also introduced to his older brother, Shinji, who one day, while sparring with Reiji, accidentally gives him a head injury that leaves a lasting scar. Even so, the two of them get along well and genuinely love each other as brothers. Shinji knows that although Reiji looks up to him as someone almost perfect, he isn't flawless, and he recognizes that Reiji has real courage of his own, even if he's not set to become the next head of the family. Because of that, Shinji hopes that if Reiji ever finds himself in trouble, he'll be there to have his back. The two brothers promise to always look out for each other whenever it's needed. Unfortunately, Reiji never manages to stop seeing himself as inferior to his brother, since no matter what they try, Shinji always seems to be one step ahead of him. As the years go by, Reiji eventually gives up trying to catch up to him, and along with that, he stops pushing himself to improve at all. Eventually, the time comes for the leaf rite, the ceremony their family performs whenever a new head of the family is named, and this time it's Shinji's turn to undergo it. Reiji still remembers, as kids, the two of them visiting the cave where the ritual takes place. There, they encounter the Yamakaze blade, a sword possessed by a Mononoke, and they can both sense it clearly. To pass the trial, the challenger has to defeat the Mononoke inhabiting the sword and claim it as their own. Going into the ritual, Shinji feels completely confident, promising he'll be back shortly with the sword in hand. He does return, but tragically he comes back possessed. As a result, Reiji is forced to watch his own brother, now transformed into a Mononoke, slaughter everyone in his path, including their father. Worst of all, Reiji sees his brother crying through it all, which only leaves him more confused. Shinji tells him that in that moment Reiji simply isn't strong enough to stop him. He lacks the hatred needed, or maybe he's just too weak, and gives him a mission: grow stronger, and one day come challenge him again. With that, Shinji disappears into the darkness of the night, and Reiji hasn't seen him since. Back in the present, we see Reiji locked in battle against an illusion of his brother. He realizes that no matter how many times he faces this illusion, it won't help him understand what really happened that day. The only way forward is to actually find and confront his brother in the real world, since he did promise that whenever Reiji needed him, he'd be there for him too. With that realization, Reiji overcomes Shinji's illusion and breaks free from Fuyo's lotus effect. Next, we check in on Ichika, who's fighting against a shadowy version of the memory of her mother. It tries to hurt her, but Ichika is no longer a helpless child, and she handles it without much trouble, clearing the trial easily. Once they regroup with the others, Shiba is thoroughly satisfied to see that his team cleared the trial in under 10 minutes. But the only two still stuck inside are Jiro and Rago. Shiba knows they can't expect them to get out quickly, since their situation is fundamentally different from everyone else's. Fuyo's lotus effect feeds on people's trauma and painful memories to build its illusions. But with two souls fused into one being, the effect plays out in a completely unpredictable way. Meanwhile, inside the illusion, Jiro tries to fight back against the dark monster, but it's not only incredibly strong, it's also far too fast for him. He has no idea what to do until the creature suddenly speaks, asking if he actually wants to know what it truly is. With that, it splits apart into a mass of shadows that wraps itself around him. Fuyo, watching from outside, notices the lotus turning black and warns Shiba that she's lost control of it, likely due to Rago's influence. Because of this, getting Jiro and Rago out now depends entirely on them. Even she has no idea what might happen next. Back inside the illusion, our heroes find themselves somewhere new, standing before the very obsidian that once held Rago captive. This time, though, they run into a young man named Jirobe, who has come to the shrine to pray, thanking Rago for blessing his village with a good harvest and for healing his sick mother. Just then, the Rago of that era appears, teasing him about not getting tired of showing up to pray so often when he could just talk to him directly. Rago clarifies that he had nothing to do with the harvest, chalking it up to good weather, and points out that Jirobe's mother recovered simply because she wasn't that sick to begin with. Even so, Jirobe insists that Rago is a great local deity. His mere presence is enough to keep Mononoke away, allowing everyone in the village to live in peace. Rago understands that other Mononoke avoid the area out of fear of his power, and he's content to keep it that way, since all he really wants is to be left alone at his shrine. In the end, Jirobe thanks him anyway and leaves an offering regardless. Watching this unfold, the group realizes that the creature from before is showing them Rago's own memories, from the time before he was sealed inside the obsidian. Continuing the memory, the shadow version of Rago explains how, back then, Mononoke roamed freely, feeding on any unfortunate soul they came across and wreaking havoc everywhere they went. What none of them saw coming was that a war was quietly starting to brew. One day, an old friend shows up at Rago's shrine, a Mononoke named Amagi. The moment Rago sees him and hears his voice, the memory clicks into place and he realizes this is the very same figure who later appeared through the glowing tablet, shortly after he was freed from his seal. Back then, though, the two of them are still on good terms, and Amagi tells him that over the past several years, humans have been organizing more aggressively to hunt down Mononoke. Rago doesn't see this as anything alarming, just a natural response from any species that's grown too full of itself. Amagi clarifies that it's more serious than that, since the humans have formed a dedicated organization specifically to hunt Mononoke, called the Oniwaban, a group backed directly by the shogunate, meaning the government of Japan, actively hunting Mononoke down in coordinated groups. By this point, Amagi has already lost many of his own kind, and those who haven't been killed are increasingly siding with the humans instead. He finds the whole situation horrifying, which is exactly why he's come to see Rago. But he's not there just to warn him. He's there to recruit him. He's been traveling across the country trying to gather Mononoke who share his ideals, hoping they can band together to wipe out humanity, since preying on humans and causing disasters is simply in their nature. The very reason humans fear and worship them in the first place. Rago, however, wants nothing to do with either side. His only real goal is to live in peace. Amagi is outraged, insisting this is an issue that concerns every single Mononoke. But Rago doesn't care. He can tell Amagi is only interested in him for his power, nothing more, and he flatly refuses to join him. Amagi realizes this isn't the moment to keep pushing, and suggests they simply wait until the next day for Rago's final answer. As our heroes watch this all play out, the shadow of Rago admits that at the time he didn't take Amagi's words seriously at all. He'd underestimated humans, and worse, he had no idea just how far his old friend was willing to go to get what he wanted. Sure enough, Amagi eventually returns, carrying Jirobei's severed head, bragging about how much he enjoyed killing him before tossing the leftovers to Rago like scraps. Consumed by fury, Rago unleashes a surge of power so immense that he transforms into the very demon we saw earlier. In a single attack, he doesn't just tear apart Amagi's body and rip off his arm. He levels everything around him, sparing only the obsidian, since it's poison to both of them and weakens them equally. Amagi had known all along that Rago wouldn't be able to contain his rage at the sight of his friend's severed head, and that the resulting destruction would be catastrophic. As a result, humans end up blaming Rago for all the devastation in the area, without accounting for the fact that he also wiped out a number of Mononoke in the process. Amagi had pushed him to the very edge on purpose, forcing him into an impossible choice: either get hunted down by humans for killing Amagi, or join Amagi's side for protection against the Oniwaban. But while Amagi kept talking, all Rago can think about are the memories he shared with Jirobei. In the end, he decides he wants no part of either side and refuses to act or choose at all. That's why, seeking peace and a way to say goodbye to his friend, Rago willingly touches the obsidian himself, allowing it to seal him away so he can remain in solitude forever. As the memory ends, where Rago's shadow finishes explaining that this is exactly what led to him being sealed in the obsidian. In his desire to stay out of the war entirely, he chose to cut himself off from the world around him so that nothing and no one could ever bother him again. Jiro tells him that all he really did was run away like a coward. He also understands that Rago still doesn't quite know what to do with himself, which is exactly why he reminds him that ever since the two of them met, Rago has already made his choice. Whether he realizes it or not, he never thought about Mononoke or humans, only about saving Jiro. Because of that, Jiro points out Rago isn't alone anymore. The shadow, however, isn't satisfied with that outcome and lunges at them. Determined to eliminate them both and return to its isolation, after a tough fight, the boys manage to make it out thoroughly battered, but very much alive, freed from the Lotus illusion. Everyone is relieved to see them safe. Shiba isn't quite sure what to make of everything, since he has no idea what they actually experience in there until they explain it to him. Learning that Amagi, leader of the Mononoke's organization, is still out there turns out to be an absolutely critical piece of intelligence. Usami wants to send the report back to headquarters right away, but Shiba stops her. An ace like this needs to be played at exactly the right moment. He picks up his phone instead and calls Toko. After training and witnessing Rago's past, the group settles down to unwind in front of the TV. Though unfortunately, all that's on is the news, since several reports have surfaced suggesting Mononoke are behind a string of recent incidents. Fuyo is hanging out with the group too and agrees that this does look like Mononoke activity. Jiro gets a little irritated with her, still annoyed that she nearly destroyed him inside her own illusion last time, and she snaps back that it wasn't actually her fault. But the two of them clearly still don't get along. Setting the bickering aside, Jiro, curious, asks why Mononoke eat humans in the first place. Fuyo explains that while they can technically eat normal food, only consuming humans actually lets them grow stronger. This makes it clear to the group that the Mononoke are currently on the hunt to power themselves up again and right on cue. A news segment mentions a strange fog cloud that swallowed an entire section of the city, Meanwhile, Shiba meets with Kusumi Toko, trying to convince her to keep his team off the case, but she flatly refuses. Even so, Shiba assures her this is a team she can trust. They already have real combat experience under their belts and have been steadily growing stronger. Not to mention, it was thanks to them that the agency even got intel on the Mononoke's plans and their leader. All of this is enough to finally win Toko over, and she agrees to bring the team into the city. Once they arrive, our heroes pause to take in the scene while nearby police speculate that it might be some kind of chemical attack. The team, of course, knows better. This is a Mononoke cloaking technique generated from an extremely dense layer of spectral energy that's nearly impossible to escape once inside. Shiba mentions that to this day, very few humans have ever actually fought Mononoke directly, since most of the agency's work involves simply keeping the whole secret hidden from the public. Getting down to business, he explains their mission. Enter the fog, rescue any survivors trapped inside, and capture as many Mononoke as possible, along with any other hostiles they encounter. He wants to do this specifically because of what they learned about Amagi, since they need every scrap of information they can gather on the enemy's side. With that, the Black Torch team heads out to work not before Fuyo hands them a gift, some petals that, once eaten, let them stay in communication with each other, since normal methods won't work once they're inside the fog. A little later, the Mononoke responsible for generating the fog, named Naruko, senses the group entering her territory. At the same time, her companion Kanawa is busy feeding on a handful of humans they've captured, thanks to Rorin's spell. He complains about the agency only sending 3 hunters to deal with them, while Naruko picks up on something important, warning the others that there are actually only 3 people out there, plus 1 Mononoke. Kanawa immediately connects the dots and realizes it must be Rago, and in his excitement moves to go find them, starting to lose his composure. Rorin warns him that if he ends up destroying Rago outright, their boss won't be happy about it. The one problem is that Naruko herself can't reveal the enemy's exact location, since she has to stay in a trance-like sleep in order to keep the fog sustained, though at least she has a solid bodyguard watching over her. Back with our heroes, the group finds itself deep inside the fog-covered city, surrounded by people trapped under the spell, but no matter how hard they try to shake them awake, nothing works. Just then, Rago wakes up, and thanks to his enhanced senses, he's able to detect exactly where the Mononoke are positioned and figure out each one's role. The only question now is pinpointing their precise location. The group considers splitting up, but Jiro pulls out his usual secret weapon, talking to animals. Just like back when this whole adventure started, he offers a few treats to the local crows and asks them where the Mononoke are hiding. Thanks to their help, the team locates all 4 Mononoke scattered around the city, and Reiji again suggests they split up, each going after one target individually. But right at that moment, Kanawa shows up directly in front of the group, his massive size immediately intimidating. Jiro and Rago instantly realize he's specifically come for them, so Jiro tells the others there's been a change of plans. They'll catch up with everyone else later since the 2 of them are staying behind to fight. With that, the rest of the team disperses, and the Mononoke admits he didn't expect a human to want to take him on alone. Jiro doesn't bother with pleasantries, declaring flatly that he came here to beat down every monster in his path, so there's no need for small talk. Bracing himself alongside Rago, he tells Kanawa to bring it on. At the same time, Ichika confronts Rorin, demanding he release everyone from his spell. Elsewhere, Reiji tracks down Naruko and notices she's not actually conscious. So he politely tells her bodyguard that if he wants to avoid trouble, he should either surrender or simply stand down. Back with Jiro, Kanawa is thrilled to see the boy confident enough to charge straight at him. The fight kicks off, and though it's brutal, Jiro quickly confirms his suspicion about the creature. While incredibly strong, Kanawa is essentially all raw muscle, meaning no matter how much damage Jiro takes, his own agility gives him a clear edge in the fight. Using that advantage, Jiro channels Reigo's energy and unleashes a powerful blast directly at Kanawa. Kanawa, however, manages to catch the attack and repel it entirely, something Jiro never saw coming. Realizing the attack barely fazed him, Kanawa begins shifting into his full monster form, cruelly pointing out that Jiro isn't human or Mononoke, just a failed hybrid that doesn't even compare to a real member of either species. With that, he unleashes his power to crush Jiro under immense pressure, leaving him barely able to move. Kanawa taunts him, saying this is exactly how he and his kind have lived for centuries, and launches into his own tragic backstory. Long ago, he explains, he was worshipped as a mountain god, receiving regular offerings from the people in exchange for protecting their land, a peaceful arrangement that lasted for generations. But everything changed the day the Oniwaban arrived, conspiring against this once innocent Mononoke. Now, he says, humans are banding together, organizing to wipe Mononoke out entirely, determined to show them clearly who the hunter is and who the prey is. With that, he moves to crush Jiro completely. Meanwhile, Ichika, after getting flatly refused by her opponent, who also insults her to her face just for being human, goes on the offensive. Determined to force him to release his captives by whatever means necessary, Rorin, equally irritated, activates his spell against her. trapping her inside an illusion strikingly similar to the one she experienced back during her training with Fuyo. He explains that his powers let him show people anything he wants, from their deepest desires to their darkest fears, which is exactly how he's managed to control so many humans at once, adding that he genuinely enjoys toying with people and watching their expressions change, like they're nothing more than dolls to him. Ichika tries relying on her superior speed to counter him, but it doesn't do much good, since Rorin strikes back with his spear before taking to the air on his wings to dodge her follow-up attacks. Not content with that, he uses his powers to change her outfit, forcing her into a schoolgirl uniform. At first, Ichika feels genuinely humiliated by this, but she manages to calm herself enough to think clearly. Refusing to let him keep toying with her, she warns him that she and her people are not his playthings, then uses her stealth mode to get above him and slice off one of his horns. That's more than enough to bring Rorin down. Removing a Mononoke's horn doesn't just cause intense pain, it also destabilizes their control over any active spells, leaving him completely at her mercy. Back with Jiro, he manages to break free from Kanawa's crushing grip using a substitution technique he learned from his grandfather. What's truly shocking, though, is that once he tears off his vest, he finds himself suddenly wrapped in a visible surge of Reigo's energy. Confused about what's happening, even Rago has no idea. Since the moment Jiro removed the vest, he felt an enormous wave of power surge through him. He then remembers what Shiba mentioned about the vest containing a special property that partially blocks spectral energy, which makes him wonder if he's been fighting this entire time while unknowingly holding back. Unfortunately, there's no time to confirm any of this, since Kanawa immediately charges at him again. Rago tries to use his power to halt the attack, but without meaning to, he applies far too much force and ends up splitting Kanawa clean in two. Completely stunned, finally realizing just how much stronger the two of them have become. It's at this point that Rago starts analyzing the situation more carefully, realizing that even accounting for the vest sealing part of his power, it still doesn't add up that he's suddenly this much stronger than before. That's when it hits him, remembering exactly how Mononoke typically grow in strength, and he looks at Jiro with growing concern. The answer is now painfully obvious. Until this very moment, he'd never actually stopped to consider what it would really mean for a Mononoke and a human to be fused together. Once he puts it all together, he realizes he's been growing stronger this entire time by slowly draining Jiro's life energy without Jiro ever noticing, since he's felt perfectly fine the whole time. Meanwhile, Reiji prepares to face off against Naruko's bodyguard, who draws a sword and unleashes a technique Reiji already recognizes, but the shock of it leaves him with no time to react. And that's it for today's episode. Comment the word cat to let me know you made it all the way to the end. Get this video to 5 likes if you want me to bring you the next episode next week, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. See you next time. Bye-bye.